friends and family members. The wireless network kept cutting on and off, and each time I had to find AOL again and retype the message. The message was simple. A few background details, then, "We need help. Please pray." I didn't know the extent of my injuries. The next few days I was supposed to speak at a booksellers convention in St. Petersburg, then go on to Moscow for more speaking engagements. The news banner on AOL was telling me that armed Chechen rebels had just seized a theater full of patrons, and Moscow was under military lockdown. I finished my message and pressed send, just as a warning popped up informing me my time was running out. Is this how prayer works, I wondered, as I walked back to the hotel? We send signals from a visible world to an invisible one, in hopes that someone receives them. And how will we know? Still, for the first time that day, I felt a lump of fear and anxiety in my stomach begin to loosen. In a few hours, my friends and family, people who cared, would turn on their computers, read my message, and pray on my behalf. I was not alone. A universal cry. Every faith has some form of prayer. Remote tribes present offerings and then pray for everyday things such as health, food, rain, children, and victory in battles. Incas and Aztecs went so far as to sacrifice humans in order to attract the gods' attention. 5 times a day, modern Muslims stop whatever they're doing, driving, having a coffee break, playing soccer, when the summons comes to pray. Even atheists find ways to pray. During the heady days of communism in Russia, true believers kept a red corner, placing a portrait of Lenin where Christians used to keep their icons. Caught up in the fervor, Pravda ran this advice to its readers in 1950. If you meet with difficulties in your work or suddenly doubt your abilities, think of him, of Stalin, and you will find the confidence you need. If you feel tired in an hour when you should not, think of him, of Stalin, and your work will go well. If you're seeking a correct decision, think of him, of Stalin, and you will find that decision. We pray because we want to thank someone or something for the beauties and the glories of life, and also because we feel small and helpless and sometimes afraid. We pray for forgiveness, for strength, for contact with the one who is, for assurance that we are not alone. Millions in AA groups pray daily to a higher power, begging for help in controlling their addictions. We pray because we can't help it. The very word prayer comes from the Latin root precarious, a linguistic cousin to precarious. In St. Petersburg, Russia, I prayed out of desperation. I had nowhere else to turn. Prayer is universal because it speaks to some basic human need. As Thomas Merton put it, prayer is an expression of who we are. We are a living incompleteness. We are a gap, an emptiness that calls for fulfillment. In prayer, we break silence, and sometimes the words flow out of our deepest parts. I remember in the days after September 11, 2001, saying over and over the prayer, "God bless America." Save America is what I meant. Save us. Let us live. Give us another chance. According to Gallup polls, more Americans will pray this week than will exercise, drive a car, have sex, or go to work. 9 in 10 of us pray regularly, and 3 out of 4 claim to pray every day. To get some idea of the interest in prayer, type prayer or pray in an internet search engine like Google and see how many millions of links pop up. Yet behind those impressive numbers lies a mystery. When I started exploring the subject of Christian prayer, I first went to libraries and read accounts of some of the great prayers in history. George Mueller began each day with several hours of prayer, imploring God to meet the practical needs of his orphanage. Bishop Lancelot Andrews allotted 5 hours per day to prayer, and Charles Simeon rose at 4 a.m. to begin his 4-hour regimen. An order of nuns, known as the Sleepless Ones, still pray in shifts through every hour of the day and night. Susanna Wesley, a busy mother with no privacy, would sit in a rocking chair with an apron over her head, praying for John and Charles and the rest of her brood. Martin Luther, who devoted 2 or 3 hours daily to prayer, said we should do it as naturally as a shoemaker makes a shoe and a tailor makes a coat. Jonathan Edwards wrote of the sweet hours on the banks of the Hudson River, wrapped and swallowed up in God. In the next step, I interviewed ordinary people about prayer. Typically, the results went like this. Is prayer important to you? Oh, yes. How often do you pray? Oh, every day. Approximately how long? 5 minutes. Well, maybe 7. Do you find prayer satisfying? Not really. Do you sense the presence of God when you pray? Occasionally, not often. Many of those I talked to experienced prayer more as a burden than as a pleasure. They regarded it as important, even paramount, and felt guilty about their failure, blaming themselves. A modern struggle. When I listened to public prayers in evangelical churches, I heard people telling God what to do, combined with thinly veiled hints on how others should behave. When I listened to prayers in more liberal churches, I heard calls to action, as if prayer were something to get past so we can do the real work of God's kingdom. Hans Kung's theological tome on being a Christian, 702 pages long, did not include a chapter or even an index entry on prayer. When asked later, Kung said he regretted the oversight. He was feeling so harassed by Vatican's censors and by his publisher's deadlines that he simply forgot about prayer. Why does prayer rank so high on surveys of theoretical importance and so low on surveys of actual satisfaction? What accounts for the disparity between Luther and Simeon on their knees for several hours and the modern prayer fidgeting in a chair after 10 minutes? Everywhere I encountered the gap between prayer in theory and prayer in practice. In theory, prayer is the essential human act, a priceless point of contact with the God of the universe. In practice, prayer is often confusing and fraught with frustration. My publisher conducted a website poll, and of 678 respondents, only 23 felt satisfied with the time they were spending in prayer. That very discrepancy made me want to write this book. Advances in science and technology no doubt contribute to our confusion about prayer. In former days, farmers lifted their heads and appealed to brazen heavens for an end to drought. Now we study low-pressure fronts, dig irrigation canals, and seed clouds with metallic particles. In former days, when a child fell ill, the parents cried out to God. Now we call for an ambulance or phone the doctor. In much of the world, modern skepticism taints prayer. We breathe in an atmosphere of doubt. Why does God let history lurch on without intervening? What good will prayer do against a nuclear threat, against terrorism and hurricanes and global climate change? To some people, prayer seems, as George Buttrick put it, a spasm of words lost in a cosmic indifference, and he wrote those words in 1942. Prosperity may dilute prayer too. In my travels, I've noticed that Christians in developing countries spend less time pondering the effectiveness of prayer and more time actually praying. The wealthy rely on talent and resources to solve immediate problems, and insurance policies and retirement plans to secure their future. We can hardly pray with sincerity, "Give us this day our daily bread," when the pantry is stocked with a month's supply of provisions. Increasingly, time pressures crowd out the leisurely pace that prayer seems to require. Communication with other people keeps getting shorter and more cryptic. Text messages, email, instant messaging. We have less and less time for conversation, let alone contemplation. We have the constant sensation of not enough time, not enough rest, not enough exercise, not enough leisure. Where does God fit into a life that already seems behind schedule? If we do choose to look inward and bare our souls, therapists and support groups now offer outlets that were once reserved for God alone. Praying to an invisible God does not bring forth the same feedback you would get from a counselor or from friends who at least nod their heads in sympathy. Is anyone really listening? As Ernestine, the nasal-voiced telephone operator played by comedian Lily Tomlin, used to ask, "Have I reached the party to whom I am speaking?" Prayer is to the skeptic a delusion, a waste of time. To the believer, it represents perhaps the most important use of time. As a Christian, I believe the latter. Why, then, must prayer be so problematic? The British pastor Martin Lloyd-Jones summed up the confusion. Of all the activities in which the Christian engages and which are part of the Christian life, there is surely none which causes so much perplexity and raises so